The future is not a straight line. It is filled with many crossroads. There must be a future that we can choose for ourselves. I'm Chris Spivey,
And I'm Eddie Webb.
and today we're here to talk about fucking Akira on Genreless. Good morning, listeners. I hope that you're having a glorious morning. Even if it is the middle of the night, I hope that you had a glorious morning or will have a glorious morning tomorrow or in the following day.
I just love how increasingly awkward this gets every time. Pretty soon it's like, "I
Eddie,
hope you're having a good 4:15 in the afternoon wherever you are."
there is no limit to the awkwardness that I can bring to any situation.
Is that your superpower?
It's one of them. I've got an array of superpowers. I'm like a Marvel superheroes character from the TSR edition. You just roll some dice and you get a bunch of randomly generated powers and stats. That is what they did for me. But instead of rolling individually, they put a whole bunch of percentiles in a huge jar and shook them up and poured it out. And every day I get to uncover a new percentile roll to see what it is. There's two jokes in there. Did you get the second joke that's harder to understand?
I don't think I got the second joke. I got the first joke obviously because I'm a Super fan, or a Marvel Superheroes fan.
M- Much like Akira and Tetsuo, I am eternal, and much like the Resurrection Man, every day I die, I come back with a new superpower. Boom! That is how layered and
I
low that
see.
joke went. Because you don't want to know what? I
Wow.
wanted to make it more awkward.
You know what really helps with jokes is if you explain them afterwards.
Of course, if I explain it two more times, it gets even funnier.
That's not how the rule 3 works, man.
Oh, I love a good callback. You know what? It's like a flashback from Arrow. If I keep doing
Oh,
it, it
no.
obviously has to improve the show, right? Maybe if I just have a whole season of flashbacks, the show will be better and more people will like it.
So Akira has flashbacks. Akira famously ends on a flashback.
I'm just saying. We know my opinion of a flashback.
I know. That's why I was say I was surprised you chose this, but I'm completely unsurprised. I'm surprised it took us this long to talk about Akira, honestly.
Honestly, if I could do it now, because I'm thinking it through, having had our previous conversation, I would have switched our placement for Akira and Ghost in the Shell.
Sure.
Simply from how the chronology of the release worked, but also how I've forgotten how directly related to Blade Runner this was, because I have not seen Akira in a long time.
I mean, that's fair. I still think it was good that we did this way in the sense that Ghost in the Shell, um, story-wise, more directly connects to Blade Runner, whereas this is a little more of a, aesthetic connection, but the themes are similar but distinctly different as opposed to Ghost in the Shell. It's just like, am I a real person because I am also part or fully android? I mean, so that's a pretty clear connection to those themes.
So behind the scenes stuff for people. When I was making this, I originally thought even potentially going Blade Runner, Akira, Blade Runner 2049, Ghost in the Shell,
Mhm.
because those how those movies would hit. But then also, if we're going to talk about Blade Runner, I feel that we should talk about the two Blade Runners together to give a better
Right,
comparison of those instead of comparing it to something else and trying to come back and recompare it to a Blade Runner.
right. But I mean, as we discover, particularly during the Sherlock Holmes run, that like sometimes sticking to a format ends up actually making the conversation more awkward, whereas doing it organically, semi-organically like this, sometimes we find connections that we didn't expect to see. And certainly doing this after Ghost in the Shell was interesting because Ghost in the Shell was made 7 years later and relied on computer graphics on top of it, and yet still doesn't quite have the same visual impact as the original, which is all hand drawn.
Well, I think it was like 99% hand drawn. I thought they used a little CGI for the scientist is like little thing where he's measuring the energy levels that spike up. I thought there was a little
Oh,
computer
right. Fair,
graphic put
fair.
over
Yeah.
that. So
For overlays, I
ninety-nine
think they did a
point
couple. Yeah,
nine nine nine
fair,
nine nine eight percent
fair. Way less than Ghost in the Shell did. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Well, it could also be that this movie was what? was it a billion yen? Roughly, whatever the American equivalent, I think, of $10 million was.
Yeah, yeah, it'd be
That's
about 1,000,000,000 yen. Yeah.
the potentially the most expensive anime at the time. I've heard someone argue there's one other, that I don't remember the name of it right now, that was more expensive at up to the time, but I do not think so.
Well, certainly because, as I understand it, Akira was always intended to be kind of a blockbuster film. And certainly when it came over to the US, it didn't do well as a film here, but it did change how people's perceptions of these kinds of movies are. So like again, Blade Runner also had a pretty high budget at the time. So I mean, this is even higher than Blade Runner's budget. But I mean, they really it's the we want to just make this into our big, massive, iconic sci-fi film, and
Which
they succeeded.
you can also they succeeded because it became a cult hit. If it didn't become a
Right.
cult hit, it would have gone away like the dodo did and would no longer exist. No one would talk about it.
As I understand, Akira is a little more well, okay, this is a bit complicated to untangle, I should say. Akira has always been kind of a sci-fi staple in Japan, as I understand. It has not always been a staple in the Western world, but now it is so referenced and homaged and drawn from that it has functionally become that. Even though we've reached a point where there are lots of people who are maybe drawing on Akira imagery and stories and references without realizing where they came from. So Akira is one of those things that can take cult. Almost like a Blade Runner on some level. It's a thing that people keep homaging and referencing to the point where people don't even realize they're homaging and referencing a specific thing.
Almost how they did with Alejandro's big Dune book that he took around Hollywood back in
Yeah,
the late 60s, early 70s, that became the staple for all science fiction going forward,
right, right,
and
exactly.
other genres too.
Mhm.
And
But no,
if
Akira is,
my what before you go
yeah.
on, if my internet reference is true, I think I read that Alejandro also helped. Oh, I forgot his name. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Actually, not forgot. Otomo, is that how we pronounce his name?
Oh, yeah.
So just
Totally.
as an FYI for people, I'm gonna be horrible with pronunciations. I will do my best, which at best means eh. But Alejandro, I think, spoke or helped Otomo come up with the ending of the movie because he's having some issues with it. It's one of the things that I read.
I didn't know that. I did know that, Otomo was in a correspondence with, the visual artist of Lenkal who was involved with the Dune that version of Dune, whose name currently escapes me, because there's a lot of, there's a fascinating connection between, French comics and manga, to the point where the number one foreign language market for Japanese manga is France.
Hmm,
And
very interesting.
it's a fascinating thing that I don't know enough about to completely untangle. But French artists and Japanese artists have been influencing each other even before that became popular in the 21st century to do.
I just wanted to point out that tidbit, how it is still fascinating that Dune is still influencing so many things in the multiverse.
Right? We could
The
just rename this podcast to "It All Goes Back to Dune."
the wackadoo version of Alejandro's Dune at that. That
Right.
if people, I don't know if anyone remembers in Dune, specifically mentioned, I think his in the end was like, oh, I'm trying to remember now since it's been so long. But Maudit becomes like a big planet and it goes off into the universe.
Hmm.
Not that it is
Yep.
all relevant to what we're going to be discussing shortly. I don't
No,
know.
not at all. Not at all. So we've mentioned the manga a few times, and I think I've mentioned it on the podcast. But a few years ago, I bought myself for as a birthday present the hardback uh, version of Akira, which came out. It was the 35th anniversary. Yes, 35th anniversary edition that Kodansha did. And basically, what they did is so Akira came out in the U.S. through Dark Horse Comics originally, and that was before manga was very popularized here. So they flipped the art and colorized it and released it as floppy comics, which the chapter length of manga and the chapter length of Western comics are completely different. So it was a pretty heavily it was a pretty good transition for the time, but it's still pretty butchered version. Um, then a black and white version was released very closer to it, but it was still the flipped art that had been updated with the English sound effects and whatnot. The 35th anniversary has the original art, so it's right to left, and it has a whole new English translation. So that's the version I got, and it's also slightly bigger size. So I've been showing Chris, but basically it's basically textbook size as opposed to comic book or trade format size. And
Eddie,
I'm
that
holding
book's too
volume
big.
3 because this is a volume where there are 3 volumes after volume 3 where nothing shows up in the film. The volume 3 is the part where the movie kinda wraps up and a version of the movie kinda happens sort of in here, but not really. But
To to quote people, that book is too big. It is
it's awesome.
unwieldy.
It's awesome. I mean, it's not nearly as big as, like, the Marvel Omnibus versions, which are just gigantic and impossible to hold. And hilariously, that this is I'm pointing, it's like, this is, like, actually one of the thinner volumes, like, volume 6 is massive. It is, like, easily, an inch and a half thick.
That's
It's a huge
perfect.
book.
Didn't
Um,
Marvel do a release of the Akira series?
I think you know what, now that I say that, I don't know, it may have been Marvel did it through Epic. You now that I say that, you're right, Marvel did do it through Epic briefly, but they never finished it. I think Dark Horse picked it up to finish it, is what you're saying.
Okay.
Because as soon as I said Epic, it all clicked into place. Yes, I remember seeing the Epic logo on. I knew it was one of those versions that I first read, and I picked up, like, issue, like, 5 or 6, and unlike, uh, superhero comics at the time, there was no real recapping. It was just the next page that happened to be there. So, like, what the hell is going on? Um, I've seen the movie, and I still don't really know kinda what's going on here. Because turns out it's pretty different.
'Cause I've all right, I guess I will admit, I have never read the manga. I had a buddy in college that loved them, collected them religiously, kept trying to
Mhm.
get me to read it, and I just never read it. But I
Right.
am as a Marvel fan, I thought I was fairly certain that Marvel had done at least a reprint or release of it too. And
I'll
you could say though the reason that the manga is vastly different is that originally uh Otomo wanted it to be different and was also still
yes.
writing the manga while he was making and creating the movie.
Right. Right. Um, so I I'm gonna talk about the manga a lot here just 'cause I want to avoid talking about it through the movie because, again, it is pretty distinctly different. Although the ending, I do wanna talk a little bit more because it's one small change is completely different. But basically, you're right. Uh, I read, in this version also has a book called Akira Club, which is actually written by Otomo, and he talks about his experience working on Akira. It also has a great collection of all of the what they call chapter pages, which are their version of covers. So it's
Mhm.
all of the original covers of each individual chapter. And then Otomo talks about some of the merchandising and working on the film and whatnot. Um, and so one of the things he knew is like he kind of knew where the manga was going, and he knew he wouldn't be able to do it in the film. So the film, which we'll get into, is really it's between Tetsuo and Kaneda. It's really a movie about those two. Um, the manga is not. It is after the ending, where the movie would roughly ends. There's 3 more volumes. It is about how Japan breaks up into factions, and it covers the stories of all those different factions. So it is much more epic and large scale in that regard. And Kaneda is just one of many characters. For example, Kay is a much more prominent character. The priest woman that we see very briefly in the movie, she's actually a significant character in the second half of the manga, and so on. Um, but one of the things that Otomo has said that he regrets the ending of the movie only because it was so much better, and he wishes he could have used that for the manga, but he knew he had to go a different direction with the manga. So this is fascinating because usually when we talk about adaptations, um, if we're lucky, the adaptations have the same creative amount, like we did with the Twin Peaks and Twin Peaks sequel series that we covered. But this is a different one where it is the same creator that is very specifically taking the same core idea and reimagining it for two different media. and you don't see that very often at all. The only example I can think off the top of my head that's even close would be how Douglas Adams did very different things for Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the radio series, the novels, and then the movie script that got adapted and the TV show. Those are all things that Douglas Adams had a hand in, although the movie, obviously, he didn't have as much 'cause, had passed away by then. But the other three he was heavily involved with, and they're all pretty distinctly different.
What about Lee for, Scott Pilgrim versus the World? Because if I remember right, Lee had a lot of influence into the movie, and then the
Oh, no, you're
animated
right.
series that came out, then versus the manga. And I think for Lee, it might be a closer comparison just because it's something I wanted to bring up is that while Lee was creating the mangas when the movie occurred, and now knowing what you said about the ending of this movie and the manga, it's interesting to know. I think that Lee's ending of
Was very similar.
his series was shaped by the
Movie.
movie that they were making versus Otomo, who was like, I wanted to do that, but I stuck to my true vision. So that's just an interesting comparison already from hearing.
Right, no, you're right, that was another one I had forgotten about, but you absolutely that's probably the closer example because, yes, similarly, Scott Pilgrim hadn't finished by the time the movie was being shot, and then, of course, the Netflix series came out, and that was very much, "Let's take a very similar approach and then go wildly different direction." So, but so yeah, it's fascinating in that regard. It's also fascinating that when I first watched Akira, I had no idea what was going on, and for years I had in my head like Akira is just. I thought it was first. I thought it was too dumb for Akira, and then I thought, oh, maybe it was just a bad translation. And over the years, I don't know if it's because I've since read the manga, because the manga doesn't again, it's different, so it doesn't really help me understand the nuances of the movie. I think it's more the fact that Akira was so far ahead of a lot of science fiction. It took science fiction years to kind of get caught up in people to understand things like the singularities and geopolitical structures and things like that for all the stuff that isn't involved bike gangers beating the fuck out of each other to make sense put together, you know?
How many times have you seen the movie?
I've seen it, I think 4 or 5 times now.
I think this makes my 3rd time having seen Akira. I saw it once in college with that roommate I was mentioning, and then I saw it
Mm.
a couple years later, and now decades later watching it again.
So I saw, again, the '90s with, a VHS tape, with the original dub, and then I think I remember seeing a fan sub translation because again, they use that kinda horrible yellow and green burned in font on VHS tapes, and it did not help me at all understand the movie. In fact, I think it made me understand it worse because it was such a bad translation. It was one of those things you get a copy from a fan at a convention kind of translation. Um, and then I watched it again, when the 2009 redub came out. And I remembered enjoying the movie more, but finding some of the character of the audio had lost its charm, and I couldn't put my finger on why. Uh, and then I found the DVD of Akira at a shop here in London for like 5 quid. I'm like, "Pff, I'm buying that." And then it turned out that was one that had the original Japanese track with a new subtitle translation. And so I watched that a couple years ago, and I watched it again for this. And I don't remember enough about the dubs to compare them honestly, but I do feel like this is one of those cases where I think the subtitle version is probably the better way to watch it.
So I've never seen this dubbed. I've only ever seen the sub version.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So that's another reason why I push for the subtitle version is I don't have a lot of interest in listening to dubs. If I can see the original, because I want to get like I think the voice acting is brought through more in the original versions of it than what it would be by a dubbed American version that for American actors that may or may not care about it. Like, oh, it's a gig.
I I agree with that.
Tetsuo Kanada. I could live without hearing.
I will say that, for 1988 anime dubbing, it is actually a reasonably good dub, but also it is has some moments that are so bad that they have stood out in people's minds to the point where, like, I had friends where I would just randomly yell, "Tetsuo!" at them, and they would start laughing because it was such a bad dramatic acting moments near the end of the movie, where literally it boils down to Kaneda and Tetsuo yelling their names at each other, which if you don't understand what's actually happening in that scene. It just sounds like two guys screaming their name at each other. And it's like, no, there's actually more going on there. And if the actors don't get the nuance of that, they're just gonna scream names. So
I think as a proud parenting moment for myself, I've even got my kid who's 11. If asked if we're watching something from a foreign country, do you want to watch the subtitle version or the dub version? And she'll always say subtitle. That I've worked hard, but that
good,
is
good.
where she's at. And I love it.
Agreed. And like I've said before, modern day dubbing is much better, and I do really feel like at this point in time, if it's something modern, it's just a personal preference. But um, like you, we're a certain age where we have been trained that that is the better way to go. And to be honest, that hasn't steered me wrong. It's like there's no downside to watching it in the original language. So go for that when you can.
And I rarely have to buy any actual media for the podcast as I am let's use the term collector to be generous for myself. A collector of media, and I usually have something ready available. I actually had to go out and buy the 4K version of Akira because I did not have a copy of Akira.
And it's the Criterion one, wasn't it?
I think so.
Yeah.
Because I may have taken a picture and shown it to Eddie. Look what I got! Look what I
Yes.
got! As a gleeful child would.
Yeah. No, I just have
Unlike
the
Ghost in Shell, which I owned.
right. I just have the um 5 pounds. This was a DVD made 10 years ago version. Although now that we've watched it again, I may see if I can also get the Blu-ray Criterion version because it is a. This is in a way this gonna be a movie's gonna be hard to talk about because the animation is just so breathtaking. I very rarely has this kind of animation been topped, certainly since '88. Same with the manga, honestly, because one of the reasons why I own the original Japanese art of the manga is because Otomo j- makes destruction look beautiful in a way that is disturbing to look at. Because the amount of detail, like a perfect example, the bar we're going to see very shortly near the beginning here. There's a lot of graffiti over it. The bar is frequented a little more commonly in the manga, but what Arma does a lot, which is common in a lot of comics, is they'll show you a establishing shot of location before they cut to the interior of the location, so you know where everything's at. And there's graffiti all over that front door. Every single time Otomo puts all of the graffiti in exactly the right place and does it exactly right, even though it's shown at multiple angles throughout the course of the manga, all of the graffiti is in exactly the right place every single time. It's that level of detail that you see in the buildings, in the rubble of the buildings, in the way the characters are drawn. Everything has just so much detail, and the original black and white art is stunning to look at, especially when he does the two-page spreads. You could just stare and look at that for minutes, and just be drawn in. It's genuinely good art, and then the movie absolutely upholds that level of quality visually. So it's just fantastic to look at. That's one of the few things, like, I think I do want it on Blu-ray just because I wanna see every single pixel of that, you know?
It was gorgeous. I'm not gonna lie. Is part of that due because God, what was it called? The Akira Committee and all the different artists and or people that came together to make the movie and all the money that they poured into it to make it as beautiful as it was. And it was shot on ones, I think I remember correctly.
What does that mean?
Kind of how when we talked about Into the Spider-Verse, how it was shot on different frames, like per ticks.
Oh, right, okay, mhm.
And so this is one of the movies that was shot on ones. I think it was one of the first ones that did it. So that's also
Right.
why it retains some of the beauty and everything else that we have to today.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why for example, the motion is so fluid. Now that you mention it, yeah, I remember they reading that. Because there's just so many frames, so many drawings that were done, and they almost never took shortcuts. There's a couple places where you can kind of see some minor shortcutting, but there's a reason why this movie is so expensive is because it was a lot of work went into the.
It was also fascinating enough. I love the fact that it was so Western influenced, and
Mhm.
it's Western influenced, but it is not a Western movie, and I mean Western is in a
No,
genre of being a movie made in the West, because you can
right.
tell like the '70s beats to it. That if you listen to any interviews or read any interviews with him, he talks about how we used to go to the cinema and watch all the '70s movies and how there weren't heroes and villains. There were just like unique people and characters that made those movies in those situations, and he kind of followed onto that. Because there's like you could see a little bit of Bonnie and Clyde in there, some other different beats, which is fascinating.
Right, exactly. And part of that is because, uh, the 70s 60s and 70s in manga drawing were kind of an interesting moment because, after World War II, Japan had a lot of Americans around, so Americans brought their culture with them, and one of those was cartoons, and so Disney cartoons in particular really inspired a lot of 60s era Japanese animation, so you can see, Astro Boy is probably a really good example that people in the West might know. The visuals of Astro Boy look very kind of Disney if you take a hard look at it. Um, and so, but they started to evolve their own style, but also some of the original style of things like the block paintings and whatnot, and mash those together to evolve what we now recognize as the manga style. So that kind of people slightly bigger eyes, slightly bigger expressions is that merging of a more realistic style with that Disney look. That's where we kind of get the anime look now. But then we have this fascinating moment of like man, they're also getting at this point in time 70s and early 80s VHS films, and are getting inspired by, as the Terminators we saw very famously in Bubblegum Crisis, but other American action films. And then right around this time, it starts to flip because, things like Akira and Wolf and Cub start being seen by American artists, particularly people like Frank Miller, and they become inspired by the manga influence going on. So now that influence has come full circle back to American animation and aesthetics. And then the iteration, the influence started going faster and faster and faster through the 90s till now there's pretty much almost entire circle of the Venn diagram of manga and American superhero art. There's a huge amount of overlap to the point where a lot of manga artists are now working at places like Marvel and DC. A lot of Marvel and DC comics have done guest things in prominent manga magazines. But this Otomo very much wanted to do an American style action film. And then his style went to go influence people who did American comics. It's fascinating.
You mentioned Marvel and some of the different artists and everything else. Did you ever see? I think was it early, maybe early 2010s X-Men anime that came out?
I heard about it, but I never actually watched it or read the manga.
Oh no, I mean anime. It is
But
like
both. I
a
knew they're both. I haven't watched either of them.
okay.
I watched them, and also separately, I knew that there was also they invited some anime artists or manga artists to do a short run of X-Men manga too. I haven't seen either of them.
I think there is at time of recording or recently there was actually a new anime version of X-Men 2 in the comics. I don't remember it off the top of my head because I'm not in my comic reading phase right now.
Right,
Uh other than anything that we're doing for Speechless, which I will not say what that is.
right. Hilariously, Batman has been done a lot in Japan. Like, I wish I still had it. Actually, I think it's on, DC's DC Universe, their streaming service, but they have translated some of the original '60s Batman manga, which are inspired by
Hmm.
the original '60s TV show. And they're deeply fucking weird, in a great way. Their main villain is Skullman, who is a man who pretends to be dead, and that's, like, his whole gimmick. Um, but anyway, so, there have been a ton of Batman animated anime to the point where, obviously, they were heavily involved in Batman animated series, and we talked about during, Big O, where when they got so frustrated they couldn't do Batman anymore, they basically did their version of Batman animated series, but with manga with, mecha.
I'm sorry,
So
Eddie.
and this The
What
Big O.
what was that series called?
The Big O.
Still not there, but I'll let
Showtime.
it go. Thank you. Thank you.
I
You
knew
know I
that's what
wasn't
you're
gonna
going
let
for.
that go.
I love that Showtime. Um, but even then,
Still one
there's
of the shockingly best anime series in that run that well, all right, for
yeah.
me, that we did. I'm still surprised by it, hands down.
Yeah, no, I threw it in there as kind of a this will be fun to do because of its connection to Batman animated series. And yeah, with you, it's like, although at time of recording, just more for Chris, but anybody else listening at the time. The '08, the Gundam '08 is now completely available on YouTube for free
Uh,
if you
I
want
don't
to
think I
finish
still think
watching that.
I wanna buy it. I need to track it
Maybe,
down and see if it's in Blu-ray and pick it up.
right? Um, but this is the problem, right? Like, but go back to Akira. Akira is so central to a lot of this stuff. I mean, it is what Blade Runner did to movies, Akira did to animation. And to a larger degree, they both influenced Blade Runner has influenced animation, obviously, because of Akira, and Akira has influenced live action since then. So I'm like, it's a blurry thing, but um, even though as we're going to talk about, there's a direct line to Blade Runner, it also set up its own shockwave in sci-fi.
Yeah. Well, and if you're curious about the direct relations to Blade Runner, other than the pure aesthetics, that I think it saw Blade Runner's aesthetics, went for it, and then amplified it.
Hmm.
But the year that we're going to talk about set in the Akira world is going to be 2019. Like the Blade Runner movie was in 2019. Funnily enough, though, I'm curious if Blade Runner 2049 was also influenced by Akira because the event for Akira happens in like 1988. We'll talk about in a second. And then it jumps ahead
Right.
like 31 years, effectively 30 years. And Blade Runner 2049 happens 30 years after that. So I'm seeing like all these different correlations that are almost linking up. And I'm curious how we were discussing
Right.
Blade Runner influenced Akira, Akira influenced other movies and media. And so Akira's influence on 2049.
Right. I mean, this is something that again is only in the manga, but like the manga starts with well, it starts with an explosion, just like the movie. We'll talk about in a second. But then like just two-page spread literally just says the year and the city in that heavy block text, just like Blade Runner, and then it slowly zooms into the city and it shows you a sky view of the city and it pans around the city before it zooms on the characters. So the opening shots from the manga are damn near identical to how Blade Runner was done. So it's very clearly
Yeah.
influenced.
I guess a couple other quick beats before we go into the summary proper at this point. The fact that the movie itself is building up to the Olympics being in Tokyo in 2019. In the real world, the Olympics happened in Tokyo in 2020. Just
Yep.
want to point out that and how incredibly close that was. That's
And there were
fascinating.
apparently jokes about government secret government installations under the Olympic arenas in 2020. So I mean, like people got, oh yeah, huh? We're gonna make Cure references here.
Did we mention that the vocals were pre-recorded? I want to make
No, I
sure
didn't
we
actually know
mention
about
that too,
this.
because oh yeah, it's one of the few times where they took, I think, more of a Western approach, and they had all the vocals pre-recorded, and then they applied them to the movie, much how the music was done before the movie was, and so the music had to be edited for a little bit, but amazing. Like, there's so many little tidbits and history associated with it. It could be primarily weird about almost like 35 minutes now. It is almost its own episode of John. Let's just talking about the history.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, it's very clear that we're both very passionate about this, and I mean, we're not going to come out of this saying anything much more than we really love this film. So, I mean, let's put our cards on the table now. But
That's a big assumption. What if I hate this movie? It's all been
I
an act up to
highly,
now. What if it's
I
like
would,
my
I would,
biggest ruse to date for you?
I would be shocked. I would be genuinely surprised that you bought a movie that you hate.
I wrote entire summaries before any that I did on you. Come on. How
Yeah,
how
that's
how
true.
deep do you think my gag would go?
Not enough to buy a Blu-ray 4K DVD. I don't think you would spend money on a gag that much.
Anything else before we go into the summary
Well,
prop?
no, I was just gonna say, like, our love or potential hate, I suppose, of the movie aside, um, uh, uh, Akira is another groundbreaking film, and that's something that's gonna be hard to distance ourselves from as we talk about this because there are gonna be points in the movie where it's like, "I feel like I've seen this before," and it's like, "Yes," because dozens of and there's one
F.
particular scene that you definitely have seen before, but lots of other chunks of this movie, so many other movies have homage and referenced it that it's gonna be at times very alien, other times very weirdly common and kinda and just predictable, and that's just at the time, none of that was true.
And
Well,
we
alien.
mentioned it earlier that the edition is a Criterion Collection edition. One of the things is this is one of the few, if only, Criterion animated movie to go into the Criterion Collection. That is how
Mhm.
phenomenal and groundbreaking and impactful this movie is.
I'm actually curious if there are any others.
And while Eddie's Googling, did you know that I am debating picking up the manga now? Because I kind of want to read it, but yet I'm not fully invested in that because I don't want more books in my house. But yet I don't want to get a digital version because if I got it, I want to get a hardback version.
Right. I now when I bought the 35th anniversary edition, it was like 120 bucks. It is not cheap, but it's definitely worth it in my opinion. Um, so yeah, I'd say check it out. And yeah, there are not many of them, and some of them are animation in. Some are pretty obvious, like Watership Down, the animated film. That makes a degree of sense. Um,
Oh,
uh,
we'll never cover Watership Down. Oh
no,
god.
it's too bleak. Um,
Y
yeah,
you say that on the Akira podcast, that Watership Down
yeah,
is too
yeah,
bleak.
no, seriously. I watched Akira and I'm going, yeah, but Watership Down's a bit too bleak for me. Yeah, I stand by it. I stand by that.
Do you
But
know
weirdly, Wally
that
is
I
also
was
on this
shown that
list
movie, I think, when I was 8 years old?
because, of course, it's a funny, buzzy movie. It'll be fine. It was
Yeah.
not fine. That is right up there with like, why would you have kids read Animorphs? Kind of. Um, but no, apparently Wally is also a Criterion Collection movie, which is a bit of a surprise, but
Yeah, but
not
look,
necessarily mad
Wally
about.
came out in what, 2013?
Right? Yeah. So it's a pretty big gap. Anyway, let's talk about the movie.
That Blade Runner-like highway scene of a car driving up to Tokyo in July 16th, 1988, moments before a silent white explosion erupts out, rushing towards the audience, and it destroys Tokyo and kicks off World War III. And we go up 31 years later into 2019. The camera shows us a map of Neo Tokyo before focusing on a crater somewhere. And the title appears Akira, or in some of the American versions, Acura.
So it's funny because like I remember you made that joke before we started watching this, and then I watched it, and hearing some of the original Japanese lines saying Akira, it is actually a bit closer between those two pronunciations. Like it is a bit closer to Akira, but not quite as bad as Akira, as some of the dubs say. So I mean, but similar like Canada. It actually sounds more like Canada than Canada. So the pronunciation is a bit different, but I'm gonna go with the ones that pronunciations I know and familiar with. I usually hear Akira. We'll assume it's Akira.
For the listeners that like to comment when my Alabama comes out and I mess up pronunciations, you should just sit back, maybe grab yourself a drink. You know what? Grab yourself a nice, I will say, single barrel whiskey of some kind. Do it at night, since you don't want to do it in the morning before you go to work or anything, and take a sip every single time I mispronounce one of the names. And I assure you, by the end of this podcast, you'll be too drunk to care.
Or dead.
I assume a high alcohol tolerance, Eddie. I can drink all day. Can't everyone?
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Or is that a
Um,
trained skill? So it's not a superpower, it's a trained skill that I've acquired over the years, kinda how Natasha went through the black room to learn how to fight and kill people. Clint took up the bow and learned from, like, the greatest, marksman in the world, Trick Shot, or depending on which comics you read, the swordsman who would know how to shoot a bow.
of course, obviously.
So my superpower is ability to drink all day. It's a pointless and useless superpower and very expensive.
Right.
Not like arrows that you can whittle yourself.
Um, so this is a question that there's a few times I want to talk about the manga a little bit. Do you know what the explosion is from watching the movie?
Um, from watching the movie, at this point, I do not. First
Right.
time. I
Okay.
know now because I've seen it before, but the first time I saw it, no. It was just
Okay.
which you would then
Well,
assume if they're gonna talk make say it's World War III, you're gonna assume that they were likely attacked by some other country, is the assumption.
right. That is. I want to talk about what you think it is, because at the end of the movie is when that becomes relevant. So we'll talk about that. But at this point in time, you mentioned before how this is using a lot of Western aesthetics to tell a very Japanese film, and this is moment one, very much it, because especially if you're a Japanese audience, you're thinking this is a nuclear bomb
Mhm.
because like Japan has been bombed before and within living memory at the time this movie was made. So the aftermath of dealing with Tokyo being destroyed is not some bizarre sci-fi conceit. It's oh shit, this again.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the movie's vibe comes from knowing that piece, which granted, when I first watched it, I never thought of, but over the years I realized, oh, that's why the movie treats it so casually on some level. Um, but then for a long time, I was like, "Why did they never mention the bomb again?" Turns out they've been talking about the bomb all along, and we realize it, and we'll talk about that when we get there. But, um, it also makes a certain amount of sense that, uh, uh, to certain Japanese audience, it's like, just that alone is horrific enough, and we don't need to discuss it any further.
'Cause the first time I saw it, if you're curious, when I figured out what it was, if memory serves, it's when they said God, I wanna say it was when they said Akira is pure energy. I was like, "Oh, that was Akira at the start of the movie."
Mhm. Okay,
But that's
yes,
also the kind of film watcher I was, is that you know me pretty well. I'm a fairly analytical person. If you're giving me facts and details, I'm, like, already calculating when they're gonna be,
right,
which
right.
is which all happens behind some of the jokes and everything else. I'm already thinking about what we're discussing.
Right. Well, since you've already gone there, then I'll just kind of mention. So, what this movie functionally does, it tells you at the very beginning what happened. It literally shows you the explosion and puts the name of the person who made the explosion up on the screen.
Mhm.
So it's almost a Knives Out level of I'm going to tell you exactly what's going on, and then we're never going to mention it again, and make you think. And I told you the whole film at the very beginning.
Yeah, brilliant. I love it. And just even the opening bits of the movie are gorgeous to watch. Even
Oh
like the
God,
car
yes.
driving up as we're going up to the main city itself, and the little in the explosion that goes out, it starts so small and slowly starts going out more and more, and the fact that it's silent. There isn't like a
Yes.
big booming sound that we normally associate with explosions, just utter silence, almost like you're in space.
Hmm. Right. We've talked before about the use of silence in Ghost in the Shell, and how I had at least remarked that it was to awkward effect. This is a fantastic use of silence because there's nothing to distract you from the image in front of you. That fills up the whole screen. There's no other audio. There's no other words on the screen until after it's done. You just have to sit and accept this horrible thing happening. And so again, it's framed almost like a horror film. Frankly, it's like this horrible thing has happened, and then so when you go into the society of Neo Tokyo after this, it's like, of course, it's a horrible place to live because this horrible thing happened.
100%. It's unbelievably horrible. The crater that it focuses on, Eddie,
Mhm.
where do you think that crater is?
Well, I mean, I assumed it's the center of Tokyo, because that's where they ultimately build or they're going to build, or they are building, the Olympic Stadium. So I assumed it was in the center of
So,
Tokyo.
well, I've never read the manga. I thought that there was something that happens on the moon, right? Someone, like, blows a hole in the moon?
Uh, I don't think so. I'm looking at
Hmm.
the opening pages myself. Okay, so one thing that's interesting that's not covered in the movie, because the movie is very silent, but there's actually is a dialogue in front of this. So at 2:17 p.m. on December 6, 1982, a new type of bomb exploded over the metropolitan area of Japan. 9 hours later, World War III began. Then it lists off all the cities that were bombed after that happens, and then the world began to rebuild. So it specifically says that it takes place in the metropolitan area of, and that this bomb starts World War III. So that's something
Mhm.
that's a little lost in the movie.
Interesting. Because for some reason, I always thought the crater was on the moon. It could be that I heard something, I thought that, like, someone used a power at the moon. That's what I started associating later after I saw it, like, a second time. But, like, I've never read the manga, I can't speak to it.
Maybe it's been a while since I've read the back half of the manga, so I don't know.
We open in a seedy bar, capital S bar, and glimpse at iconic red capsule's jacket. The same jacket I keep asking Eddie to get me for Christmas. Before the alley with Tetsuo tried to figure out the best bike in the universe. Once again, I ask Eddie for a Christmas present, and you know what he gets me? Nothing. Before Kaneda tells Tetsuo he's not man enough for it and hops on his hog. As the biker gangs cruise the city looking for the rival gang, the Clowns. No Batman jokes here at all. We get a view of Neo Tokyo. It's plagued by corruption, anti government protests, corrupt cops everywhere, terrorism, gang violence. And during a violent rally, Kaneda leads his booster gang. I made a cyberpunk joke. The capsules against the rival clown gang. Kaneda's best friend, Tetsuo, inevitably crashes his bike into Tiksaki, an Esper who escaped from a government laboratory with the aid of a now dead resistance person from a resistance organization, TBD. So much
Um,
happens in that, I think, 3 minutes of screen time, like, an entire world happens in within.
yeah, 'cause, one of the things that, I think ends up, working out really well for this movie, is, the fact that, vigilante biker gangs are a thing in Japanese media, um, and they're called, Bozosuku, I think?
They are.
Anyway, just they're just vigilante bikers, and so the movie just assumes, vigilante biker gangs, so we don't have to explain a lot of this stuff,
We don't,
and
Eddie, because they were so popular even in America, they were in Weird Science.
right, right, and that's the weird thing is aged really well is because it's a thing that we also have outlaw biker gangs. They're very different in American culture, but we still have the concept of outlaw biker gangs, and so it's like, oh, we also know a vigilante biker gang, so we can get on board with this, and again, like the characters are painted very broadly. So, you know, we know that Tetsuo is kind of the awkward one that seems to get in trouble a lot, and Kaneda is the brash one, is always throwing his weight around. Um, and then you have the bigger guy. I forget his name off the top of my head, but he's loud and a bit purchased. And they're done almost comedically at this point in time. And that's one of the things I love about Akira is that Kaneda doesn't stop being a brash idiot for, like, most of the movie, He doesn't really
Well,
change.
we also get constantly reinforced so how young they are. Even when they're
Yeah,
in the bar that's doing drugs and you're seeing all sorts of stuff that kids shouldn't be around, they're at least a decade younger than everyone in that bar. We'll say the bartender's mid-20s. They're probably 15 at best, going in like
mhm,
they own the place and they're part of that world.
right,
So that is reinforced for you, which also then tells you parts of their personalities and how they are going to act in a very specific way.
mhm,
And
um,
you saying that Kaneda is young and brash. I wouldn't say quite the same thing. It's when
I
you are a certain age, you feel invincible.
oh, no,
I think
totally,
that's like a universal imperative.
more the fact that a lot of cyberpunk protagonists that we've seen, are some level of cool and intelligent, right?
Yeah.
Decker, Kay, the Major, they're very smart people, very damp down emotions, we're gonna call 'em. Kaneda just living his best life and doesn't have a clue what the fuck is going on for, like, most of the film. And I love that for Kaneda. Kaneda is just like, "Man, I just wanna go back to beating the shit out of clowns and maybe doing some drugs. That's really what I wanna do with my life. Maybe get laid occasionally. I don't wanna be involved in high-level government conspiracies, man," you know? But he keeps getting drawn into this really elaborate plot, and so he's, like, the best cyberpunk protagonist because he's like, "I just don't care, but I care about my friends." And that's the thing, it's really the center of this movie is that he cares about his friends, and that is the one really strong quality he has.
That, and if you notice throughout these most of these encounters, he doesn't want to kill anyone. He doesn't care if he fucks
No.
you up. He doesn't want to kill you. And he
Right,
pulls back other people from killing people,
right.
which is incredibly weird if you're thinking about the cyberpunk world they're living in, like the capsule bars, like a drug den, and all these other things they're dealing in. And he doesn't care if they like break your bones. You'll get better eventually, and then you'll come back out and you'll ride your bike again, and then we'll do all this shit over again.
Right,
Versus we put a cap in you, you're gone. And that's not
right.
what they want to do, which is an interesting take already to take for a cyber.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, as much as we seem to enjoy Ghost in the Shell is a very cerebral, and so it's interesting that again, I'm glad we watched it in this order because if you watched it in chronological order, there would be Akira, and then everything kind of slides backwards to that model. But this we can see, like, no, Akira has a level of heart and community that some of these other more cerebral cyberpunk films lack. And it's surprising that of all the things that people have drawn from Akira and homaged and referenced, that's one of the few things that it took a long time for people to actually start homaging and referencing more explicitly.
Did you, all right, trying to find out your timeline. Were you reading the manga before you saw the movie?
No, I saw the movie way before the manga. I picked up the comic because I was like, "Oh, I think I remember that movie." Because but here's a timeline, is early '90s, saw Akira, went, "What the hell is that?" It was the right kind of "what the hell is that?" It's in my head and I wanna understand it, but I can't. Then I see a comic a few years later going, "Oh, maybe that'll help me to explain, what happened." I saw the movie, read the comic for a few issues, like, "Nope, none the wiser, in fact, more confused." Then, "Oh, there's a new translation of it, maybe that will help me understand it." Okay, I do understand it a bit better now. Still a bit confused at a few points, and then, um, now it's fun. So, like, I came to the manga later, and really I picked up the manga again, like, 3 years ago because I was like, "Fine, if this manga is as beautiful as it, if nothing else, I'll have some beautiful art books in my house that, but maybe I'll get a chance to read and understand it." And then I realized, "Oh, this is quite different," because again, like, the themes of community play out more in the manga because it is about different factions trying to survive in, because spoiler for the end of the film, after Tokyo explodes again, there's 3 whole books after that because it's now they're in a post-apocalyptic setting. You know?
That okay. Now I'm just curious. Slight spoiler for those books
Mm.
afterwards. For the 3 books after, does that mean that all the psychic kids are gone and it's just normal people?
There are way more psychic people in them. Like,
Okay.
um, like, again, I don't want to spend too much time talking about the manga, but long story short, the cult of Akira that we see briefly near the end of the film, that is a cult
Mhm.
of psychics. They're all psychic, and they've
Okay.
been hiding from the government for years.
So then it leans into the fact that they've essentially made like the psychic powers in this like the force. Because there's a line in the movie where they say everyone has it.
Right. Mhm. That is
So it
something
like
that doesn't
flows
get
through
picked.
each and every one of us. It's the living it. I could do a whole
Right, and
yeah, thing.
in the movie, it's this is the excuse why Tetsuo has it, is because this is why some random kid picks it up. That's one of the reason. But in the manga, it's much more, uh, and so we went to activate it in everybody. But then they're also fighting against the military because martial law is still in force. And then also, there's a bunch of people who want to worship Akira because I guess we'll just quickly say, Akira is alive and a real kid manga. He's not chopped
What?
up for parts. Yes, he's an actual kid frozen in below 0 temperatures. And so when they open up the big thing to find inside, there's actually a kid there, and that kid becomes the object of worship for a chunk of.
Okay. Then a question, another question. We have that Akira's in the movie, body parts frozen in a tube. These finger quotes, kids that are have aged, are they in fact like 50-year-olds that are kid statured, or are they in fact kids that were also cryogenically frozen and released and appear to be older?
No, we're just all over the place, but fuck it. No, no, they were all
It's Akira.
kids.
You know what? They made a movie. They took like 2,000 odd pages and jillions of graphic novels and slammed into a 2-hour movie, jumbled it up and poured it out on the page. We can be all over the place today.
Right, right. No, as I understand it, those were kids because they thought that only kids could develop psychic power. So the government thought only kids could develop psychic, and so they tried experiments on them and gave them drugs to develop their powers, and they did. But using their powers drains their life force rapidly, which is why they look aged evenly of conception. So they are still only children. That's why they live. That's why they're in a playroom. That's why they call it the baby room, because
But
they're not much more than 10, 11 years old.
all right, then I guess dream logic is throwing me off. If they're playing with Akira and Akira set off the explosion, we already know it's Akira, 31 years ago, should they have not aged 31 years?
No, because they Akira's frozen so that he would not age. He's put in
I know
cryogenic
that's why
suspension.
Akira's body parts are like that for the movie.
Oh,
But
right, right,
in
for
the
the movie,
movie
right.
In the movie, we see distinctively these kids in a playroom, 4 of them, the 3 are 3 older kids that are little kids that look like old people, with
Right.
a 4th one who is Akira. And
That
if
that
Akira is
that's all in their
cryogenically
minds.
frozen for 31 years, these 3 other kids should have aged 31 years if not cryogenically frozen.
No, as I understand the timeline, and granted, one of the things that both the movie and manga do is, There's lots of characters talking about things that they understand that other people don't, so the audience isn't always clued in on stuff because no one spells out a nice clear timeline of things because that's
Yeah.
intentional. Um, but as I understand it, Akira explodes. Um, he was also a government experiment. It goes bad. He explodes in Tokyo. World War III happens. So they freeze him while the military has said we have disposed of him, but they didn't. They secretly froze him
Yeah.
and then we've tried to reverse engineer psychic powers from him. But he is frozen but his mind is still free. So when the kids are being experimented on, Akira goes into their brain, and so they all play together in their mind, and that is how they know Akira. Because you remember the kids also talk a lot in their minds to each other, and occasionally
Yeah.
even though they are physically in different parts of Tokyo, when they're talking together, sometimes we'll cut to them inside the playroom. That is act the playroom is a metaphor for their mind space. It is also physically a playroom. It is identical, which is the confusing part, but it is also a mental space that they all share.
Well, I know that, but what I'm saying is at least in we're gonna totally be at the end there. In the end, when we get a vision and other parts, we see the 4 of them all together in that playroom while they're being experimented on. I think Akira is number 21, then we've got,
Right.
like, 25, 26, and 27. The iterations of those numbers and the time frame for Akira, therefore, infers that all of them were together 31 years ago.
Okay, so I don't okay, so Kira is 21. Um, okay, you know what? Now that we're talking this through, I may be misremembering this because something in the movie doesn't talk about. Kaneda is 41 in the manga. So implies there's actually been a number of test subjects since then. Um, it's not Kaneda, not Kaneda. Tetsuo is 41. Kaneda's not 41. Jesus Christ, Kaneda's stupid. No, Tetsuo is 41. Um, so I may be misremembering. You may be right. They may have been contemporaneous. Um, but certainly, I do know that they have aged oddly because as a result of the experiments. That part is clear. But I may be remembering it backwards. Maybe it's they're stuck as kids, but they're physically aging. I do aging rapidly. I maybe
Okay,
um
because I know
because
everyone's
you're
always
right
called them
because you're right
kids.
because Takeshi is 23. That's the kid who almost gets run over. Um, and then the girl is 24, and the kid in the hover chair is 25. If I remember.
We're close on numbers. I think I was thinking it's like 25, 26, and 27. But either way, like
Right.
those early 20 numbers versus 31 years later infers that they're all roughly around the same time. So their kid
Yeah, that might be
bodies
right. Right. Okay.
30 years later. So
Yeah.
therefore there would not be kids. They would appear to be kids. Yeah, I'm stuck on like a totally irrelevant point, but
Well, I mean, the I suppose more important, well, not more important, because none of this is important. Salient point is the fact that one of the things that Akira as a story does really well is that a lot of the characters talking about this don't do the well, as you know, Bob, we froze this kid back in 31 years ago. They don't do that. They talk about this project as if they've been doing it for 30 years, so they don't need to explain it, which means we as the audience get lost occasionally, but it feels very real as a result. So it does open these kinds of questions like how did this actually happen? Um, uh, and honestly, now I have to go back and reread because if I reread the manga, it may actually explain that better. It's been a minute because Kira does, like I said, he's a real kid and he gets a throne the whole 9 yards. So he may explain kind of what happens in that chunk of the story.
all right.
But
I was just curious
it
because
it's fascinating.
that's something that's always stuck with me. And I haven't bothered it's stuck with me, but not enough that I'm gonna go and research it and find out. In case
Right,
you knew I was curious, but it feels like they would be adults based on their numbering system, the number of years that have gone by. I think in the movie though, they say Tetsuo is like 29 or something. So that infers there are fewer numbers. But at no point in time have they shown any of the other kids that would be like the gap between there in a room with them all together. So there's some vagary around that, which is intentional for the movie, but mentioned analytical, trying to figure it out.
right. And I think have to come down to is like it's what the movie does. So Ghost in the Shell to compress everything. They kind of just didn't explain some things, which we talked about. They simplified the plot and then just didn't explain some things, and that was fine. One thing Akira did, 'cause ultimately this is a conspiracy thriller. Again, Ghost of Shells is a different kind of thriller, but this specifically is about a conspiracy thriller. And so having stuff just not explained works really well with the aesthetic of the movie because it's like, of course, we're not gonna have all the mysteries explained because that's how conspiracy thrillers work. So it's a fast step. You see why people for a very long time were like really wanting more accurate translations, more accurate dubs. Why people wanted this to be retranslated and re-released because they clearly wanted to know what was happening and try. Hopefully, each of these would get us closer and closer to understanding what actually happened.
Yeah. So, Eddie, another minor rant for you then. That was less of a rant. That was me of trying to problem solve. Uh, why is the only black character in this movie in face paint and is the largest character we see on screen?
So I did mention that French and Japanese are influenced, which does mean that for a country that does not see a lot of black people, oh, this must be how they look. So we'll just assume that the French way they depict these people is accurate. And the French are not great on this front. So the big lipped stereotype. Like for example, I'm reading Asterisk comics right now, which is a well beloved comic series. France started in the '60s, but I'm reading issues that going up that have done like in the '80s, '90s. They still have that visual in them, so they're really not. And Japan has inherited that until extremely recently, frankly.
Yeah. All right. Oh, I won't dwell on it right now, but I just wanted to point that out that it
Yeah, no,
was
it's not good.
notice it then, notice it now, still irritating.
Yep.
What I will say is they were nice enough to make the character the leader of their own biker gang to be a Joker,
Mhm.
but
I
so
will also
problematic.
say in the manga, that character has a lot more. The war with the clowns goes on a bit longer. I said I wasn't gonna keep doing this, but I keep sorry. Um, uh, so it's just interesting that that is one of the plots. I understand why they cut it because the war of the I keep saying Jokers. 'Cause I keep thinking Batman Beyond. Because there's another connection. But the war of the clowns is not really relevant to the story, but it is relevant to. It is cool that he is a he's a leader of his own gang. The head clown is leader of his own, because
You mean the
he
Joker?
kind of yeah. There's a whole subplot where he becomes Tetsuo takes over the clown gang, and he becomes his right hand man for a while. The whole thing just doesn't happen in the movie.
Ugh. Anyway, the Kaneda slide is probably one of the most memed things in the universe. It is so iconic. It is still breathtaking and beautiful to this day.
Yeah, really reflects the whole kineticism of the.
Mm. Ah, love it. All right. This hurts to talk about given the current state of the world. But Eddie, those poor protesters that were all gassed and beaten,
Mhm.
it is too reminiscent of the real world.
Yeah, it's obviously, this movie is clearly a woke attempt to diminish the current U.S. administration. If it weren't for the minor fact that was done 40 years ago.
Yeah. But we knew that the rebels that were trying to quotation mark save the Esper adult were bad people because he shot and killed two dogs. Eddie, just bam, bam, dead dogs.
Yep,
So we instantly knew we had to hate that character in every group they were with.
yep, yep.
That's
Uh, but also, I mean, again, that whole how they do gun violence in this movie again is a bit reminiscent of the original Blade Runner movie. 'Cause we talked about then, like that's not where the action occurs. Whenever guns come out, it's just brutal and nasty. And that same thing, that same rule applies in Akira. Akira is much more action oriented than Blade Runner as a whole, but that's more jumping on people's bikes and hitting them with pipes.
if Blade Runner had had a cool bike scene of like Deckard cruising around the streets on a bike, how Kaneda does, it would be on par.
Yep,
Anything else before we move on? Because I just keep thinking about the bike scene now. Like that's just ah.
it is one of the most iconic scenes. But yeah, let's move on.
Assisted by a fellow Esper, the Japanese Self Defense Force colonel recaptures Tasaki and Tetsuo, who will be hospitalized and arrest the capsules. While being interrogated by the police, Kaneda meets Kei, an activist with the resistance movement that kills dogs, and tricks the
Mhm.
authorities into releasing her with his gang. We learn that the kids have been experimented on and the colonel's position is at risk. All right, Eddie, I am torn because there is so much police brutality and terrorism all in one scene, and then instantly undercut with humor before spiked up to graphic violence.
Yeah, like, this is the first movie we've seen this run where humor plays a noteworthy part. Like, even the scene where, Kaneda and his gang are put in front of the principal, and they just have the shit slapped out of them. It's brutal. I mean, blood comes out of their noses, their faces are puffy afterwards. These kids are beaten and physically abused, and yet it's still kind of funny. So one of the things that Otomo does really well is does a good job of using humor to break the tension, but the humor is also in service to the tension. So you're right. It's the you have this horror. You have these scenes of police brutality, but then there are also sight gags during that scene, which means you want to laugh at them, but also you feel bad for laughing at police brutality, which is that's the conflict I think Otomo wants to bring out of this, is
Yeah.
that the tension's broken. I want so desperately to have the tension break, but as soon as I laugh, I'm actually part of the problem. So it's a great pacing, Cabana.
Oh, what did you? All right, I looked throughout. I didn't see any female officers. In fact, there's there seem to be fewer female characters in the movie on the
Yeah,
and the ones that are here seem to only serve like a very specific purpose and just not like background characters.
right. Um, Basically, the only in the movie, the only meaningful female character is Kay. And even then, she's either manipulated, used, or the object of Kaneda's sexual attentions. Although I will give the movie credit, um, uh, Kaneda comes across as just awkward teenage dude trying to flirt, and she shuts him down pretty consistently. So like, it's not. Kay has full agency during the whole conversation. Kay is like, "Yeah, I'm super awesome," and she's like, "Shut up, kid." And he's like, "Oh man," I mean, it's she is never at the wrong end of Kaneda's affection. To leave it at that for now. Um, it's awkward that near the end of the movie, she literally becomes a mouthpiece for another character in the movie. But yeah, the three female characters that have any kind of impact on the movie. One is an old woman, one is a young girl, and one. So it's not great on that front.
Anything else before we go on? Because I just wanted to focus on the police scene for a beat and the colonel's position, which we're learning is at risk, which I thought was pretty funny.
Precarious. Yeah.
At a secret government facility, the colonel and his head researcher discover that Tetsuo possesses powerful psychic ability similar to that of Akira, the Esper responsible for Tokyo's 1988 destruction. Esper Kyoko forewarns the colonel of Neo Tokyo's impending destruction, but the city's parliament dismisses the colonel's concerns, leading him to consider killing Tetsuo to prevent another cataclysm. Meanwhile, Tetsuo escapes from the hospital, steals Kaneda's bike, and tries to flee Neo Tokyo with his girlfriend Kiro. But the clowns ambush him. The capsules rescue Tetsuo and Kiro, but Tetsuo suffers intense headaches and hallucinations and is re-hospitalized.
I'm sorry. This is the part where everyone gets left out. My apologies, but
Yeah.
yes,
The discipline
discipline
is
correct.
what I see in my subtitle version. I think was told the American dub says something else. I'm not sure what it is.
I, I, I think it's shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up.
I like discipline better.
Yes. And
I don't want
yeah,
to go to that
Bark.
school, Eddie.
No, it's bad. Well, to be fair, that school is supposed to be for delinquents. It is supposed to be you have already been arrested of a crime of some sort. You still need to go to school because the state mandates that you go to school. So this is the last place you go before you are just into jail forever. So it is meant to be a bad school.
Do
It
we
still doesn't excuse
get
the horrible abuse of the children.
Wait, do we get that from the movie? Because I'm gonna jump ahead a beat. Is that we don't know if they were arrested, but we do know that both Kaneda and Tetsuo were abandoned.
Um, the speech in which the principal is talking to the students, he does say, "This is your last chance." Um, and he calls them delinquents specifically and says, "This is your last chance, and if you fail here, then you're gone forever." So it is implied. It's a little more explicit, but it is at least implied in the movie that this is meant to be a school for delinquents.
Okay.
Um, uh, but yeah, I mean, and again, like it's also funny, like because this guy's beating the shit up, and then they go, "Yes, yes, sir. Thank you for that." And then as soon as they get to the staircase, they start talking shit. Yeah, yeah, I'm gonna kick your ass, blah blah. They're kids, right?
Yes.
But in front of this guy, of course, they're gonna just say nothing. But afterwards, it's like you better run after they're already gone. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's exactly. They're fucking teenage boys. I love it.
Because one of the things I do love about the movie is it keeps showing us how proficient they are in certain things. But at the same time,
Mhm,
when they then have to go and deal with an adult who this may be what they do, they're, I don't want to say overpowered, but they're overshown and their youth is once again like put on display. Like we're gonna see in a little, actually it's here when they retake Tetsuo, how
mhm,
Kaneda tries to fight back into like that special defense person, and he just easily tosses him to the side like it's nothing.
mhm,
And we've established now that Kaneda is out kicking clowns' asses and doing all this stuff and doing like great bike moves where someone's on a bike, he leaps in the air and knocks him off the bike. So we're
mhm.
establishing he is a very proficient character, but yet he's young.
Right. Yeah, and uh, there's the running gag also that like Tetsuo's not as good on bikes as the other members of the thing, and that's kind of throughout the first chunk of the movie. They've been playing with this subplot that Tetsuo needs help, but Kaneda, who's he's never explicitly called the leader of the gang, but everyone refers to him as if he is the leader of the gang. Because Kaneda supports him, everyone kind of tolerates. Um, but it's important because like all these boys have because they're so human. They're so human. It helps you to overcome the fact that they're also they're violent people. This is a violent gang. But throughout all of this, it's the one of our own's been captured. We will go rescue him. There's no debate on this point. Um, when Kaori is sexually assaulted, they beat the shit out of that clown. So a lot of things they're doing are much more in the vein of being vigilantes as opposed to just random violence. It's just that the world is so fucked that everything needs vigilante justice as a result.
And even here, though, is you still have Kaneda pulling them back from killing the clown.
Yep. Mhm.
So reinforcing constantly that even though they're in a shit world, life is important. Like
Right, because
even
Tetsuo
if
wants
it's
to
like
kill
this
him, and
asshole's life, it's still
mhm.
important.
Yeah, because Tetsuo wants to kill him, and Kaneda's like, "No, that's enough. He's learned his lesson."
Eddie, the hallucination when all of his intestines fall out onto the street. It is
Mhm.
disturbing. That scene is more disturbing than later scenes because later
It
scenes it
is.
goes over the top. That is just like, oh, that's the horror writer in me loving it.
And I will say, having watched this a couple times recently, I knew this time around that that is also an image of the future because he's going to be shot in
Mhm.
the stomach. So it's not only just a random horrible hallucination, but also tips towards what's going to happen later on in the movie. So it's a great scene. But yeah, the other thing also that this movie does wonderfully is that those moments just come out of nowhere. There's no setting him up. It's just suddenly he's tripping out, and now suddenly his guts are on the ground, and the movie just you're here now. It's great.
And in this piece, we do in fact learn that Tetsuo cannot handle Kaneda's bike, which is what
Yeah.
gets him into this entire situation.
Yep. Mhm.
And it is a weird fascination with that. I have a fascination with that bike, Eddie, but I wouldn't try to steal it. And he's obsessed with it. Like one of the reasons he comes back here is to get that bike after escaping from the hospital first.
Right. Which is so funny because you're right that bike has become such an icon of well cyberpunk, frankly. The slide has been heavily homaged. That specific bike has been heavily homaged. If you watch Cyberpunk Edge Runners, which came out a few years ago, there are bikes that look very similar to Kaneda's bike. So in a way, what has happened is over time we have become Tetsuo and some because we all covet that bike.
Yeah.
which plays really well with the themes of this movie that anyone could be Tetsuo.
And did you just make a Spider-Man joke, Eddie, how everyone can
I
wear the
did
mask?
just make a Spider-Man joke. Anyone can wear the bike.
The other way that you can tell that this movie was made for a wider audience is the bike itself. If you look at the bike, there's stickers in English, there are
Mhm,
stickers in Japanese, I think there's even stickers in another language, but
mhm.
they're all over the bike, and if you're looking at the background screens and things, they do the same thing throughout the movie. Even in the bar, when we first get there, the bands on the jukebox that Kaneda is looking at, I wanna say, like, Cream is one of the bands, like a '70s band from the US and, like, some other bands. I think it was even The Doors too. So all that's there to engage different cultures and people in different countries by seeing these things, showing you that it's like a mashed world that anyone could live in.
Yeah, and honestly, another reason why it worked out well is, uh, this is still true to a degree to Japan today, but, like, Japan just considers English to be cool, and so a lot of times people use English words just as in the same way that a lot of people in America will use Japanese characters as a way to look same kind of rough aesthetic. But oftentimes, much like in the US, it's just nonsense or gibberish. So English speakers laugh at it, but also Japanese speakers, American attempts at this. I mean, it works both ways. But the English is actually pretty consistently good. And there's well, I've only ever seen one, and it was just a very slight flub. It's not incorrect. It's just not perfectly accurate, which is when you see the Akira pieces. The way they're labeled is a little off. But generally, they're really, really fantastic. So, like, there was a clear effort to like we want to make this as authentic as possible in this far future of 2019, where American and Japanese culture are much closer together. Because again, like Blade Runner, they envision a world where these two cultures would be overlap more, and they wanted to not intentionally, but certainly the idea of like if you squint, this Tokyo, Neo Tokyo, could exist in the same world as Deckard's Los Angeles, right?
Love it. This is also 30 minutes into the movie, almost on the dot is when we get to see Akira.
Yeah,
Can you believe we're only 30 minutes in the movie?
yeah,
Overhearing their plan to rescue Tetsuo and the other Espers, Kaneda joins K's resistance cell. At the hospital, the Espers try killing Tetsuo via hallucination, giving you the creepiest Toy Story prequel you'll ever see. But the attempt is thwarted by the bloody foot. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's Teenage Mutant
yeah,
Ninja Turtles.
yeah.
I couldn't help myself. It was blood. It was foot. It's like a joke writes itself. Frustrated, Tetsuo searches for them, killing any orderlies and military men blocking his path. The resistance group infiltrates the hospital. Many of them are decimated in the sewers, and Kyoko draws Kei and Kaneda into the Colonel and the Esper's futile attempt to stop Tetsuo. A real hallway fight occurs, making Daredevil blush. Kyoko tells Tetsuo that Akira is located in cryogenic storage beneath the Olympic Stadium construction site and could help Tetsuo with his powers. After betraying everyone around him, especially Kaneda, Tetsuo flies out of the hospital to hunt for Akira. Flies out of the hospital.
Right. Mm.
Eddie, by the
And
way, his
yeah.
entire head sort of dropped when I said the bloody foot. He was like, I can't believe he did that.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. No. So this is obviously Tetsuo's heel turn, right? It's like,
This wouldn't this
well, I
whole
mean,
movie be Tetsuo's heel turn? Like,
sure, but I mean,
okay, Kaneda
before,
has expressed constant loyalty to Tetsuo. Tetsuo, throughout
right?
the course of this movie, has continuously tried to steal his bike, continuously been insulting to him. I, I can't see a time where Tetsuo has been a good character.
No, but Tetsuo was loyal prior to this.
Oh,
Um, yes, he maybe wanted to steal Kaneda's bike, but he went with the rest of the gang when they went after clowns. He protected his girlfriends. Um, he's not a good person. I'm not at all arguing that. But this is the point where Tetsuo decides that he is a where his avarice for power now has an actual channel, and he starts to care more about power than about the gang. So that's kind of why I put it roughly this area. Um, but I mean, I don't know. This is there's this point where like you almost kind of feel bad for him, particularly like, from the moment where he starts having hallucinations to the point where he initially kind of abducted here. It's the I at least I feel a little bad for him. It's like, okay, you didn't ask for this. Now suddenly this has been thrust upon you. Um, but then when he starts particularly uh like I said, the hallway fight, and it's like he's
Ugh.
just stomping kids. And it's like the argument how old they actually are assigned, and certainly it's a good argument to have. They as far as Tetsuo knows, they're kids. And he's just
Mhm.
brutal to them. Yes, they try to scare him at first, but he is brutal to them. And it's just like, okay, no, I was maybe warming up to you, but no, buddy, you're a bad person, and you should feel bad.
It is he goes in the hall, Eddie, and he dispatches orderlies and, like, the military at whim. The
Mhm.
military, we'll say, at least have weapons. The orderlies are just there running around trying to flee, essentially, and he's just blowing them up like they're nothing.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
mm, mm,
And the thing is like, so Kaneda, this is why I love Kaneda. So Kaneda's like, okay, my buddy's been captured. Let's go rescue him. Pretty straightforward. That doesn't mean I'm not going to try to flirt with the cute girl I'm working with the whole time, but I can do two things at once. Um, and like the whole time, like Canada's just like, all of it's like, I'm going to go rescue Tetsuo. And every time the resistance are talking about anything else, he's like, whatever, we're gonna go infiltrate. We're gonna go do this. Kaneda is just determined. And then Tetsuo is like, yeah, fuck you. And I think having that moment cast so close after the kids is like, yeah, no, you're supposed to hate Tetsuo now. And it works because the Kaneda's been nothing but loyal to you, buddy. Yes, he's a bit of a
yeah,
horn dog. Yes, he's a bit violent. Yes, he's a delinquent. But he's been nothing but loyal to you. And this is how you treat him? Fuck you, Tetsuo.
because to go back for when Kaneda and Kay, we get that first glimpse of Kaneda essentially finding his way to join the resistance force, but we also get what I think is Kay's first kill, having been a part of the
Yeah,
resistance.
right.
Is that fight that sort of flies down into the sewer where Kaneda is helping her out, but then she ends up shooting the guy that was going to shoot Kaneda, and the look of horror on her face having done it. And that infers it's the first person that she's ever killed, which is a huge deal because it once again goes back and reinforces how young these characters are in this world and the importance of life to them at this stage in their.
Yeah, honestly, uh, Gundam is probably the last time we talked about anything that had really young characters that dug into the actual impact of war on the psyches of these characters. I mean, Kay's older than Kaneda by a few years. I mean, I'm thinking of Mori. I don't think her age is established in the movie, but she's certainly young, like you said. And so it very much feels like she came along because she was ideologically supportive of the resistance movement. And it's like, oh, this is the actual cost. This is what we actually have to do to properly revolt, and that's made her more conflicted. And it's very real. Again, when guns come into play, things go bad very quickly in this movie.
So my question for you now is we have this moment here, and then quickly when they're breaking in through the sewer, we know that at some points in time she gets possesses by Kyoko.
Yeah,
Kay runs over to when they get attacked, picks up the machine gun from one of her killed compatriots whose arm just kind of hands kind of falls off of it and starts shooting to take out the guy on the machine gun hover bike.
right.
Is that Kay? Which if it is, that would be an incredible badass move trying to save everyone's life. Or is that Kyoko having control of Kay?
Uh, My personal opinion is I think it is K. My reason for this is if you remember during the hallucination, when Tetsuo started bleeding, Kyoko became very freaked out by that. That
Okay.
implies to me that she does not do well with violence. So
Okay.
I feel like that is all K.
Good. Because that was my reading too, which gives that character a lot of agency before we
Yes,
strip it all away. Like,
right.
gone.
It is. I mean, again, I think this is the virtue of the very limited way we're doing this because you're having to strip thousands of pages down to a 120-minute movie. But at least they found space to briefly show, no, she is actually a very cool character. Unfortunately, the plot is going to mandate that we take control.
And we also then get a glimpse of what Kaneda's primary skill set is controlling a bike. And we get that on the hover bikes. It's all nice. It's like reinforcing different things they do well, and it's making them work together as a cohesive team before K becomes a Kyoko puppet.
Right. One thing also I just wanna mention is during that specific scene where he has the hover bike and they're in with the water area, um, the physics of how the hover bike moves and how the water reacts to it and how the light spins around, it is unreal. I mean, it was a very careful fact to think like, if the hover bike is pushing down this way, the water's gonna splash this way, the light's gonna reflect on it this way. Um, it I mean, it's obviously very clearly animated, but the physics of it looked like it could have been filmed. So that's one of those moments where you look at it and you go, "This is stunningly beautiful," even though it is a very violent scene, which is, again, I think exactly what Otomo is going for here is like the balance of the beauty of precision with the chaos of actual real world violence. But that scene in particular, you really get to see just how much detail.
Like, all that is beautifully done, but then it is undercut during different points in time during the section, because this is a relatively large section that was condemned, is that
Mhm.
we get a real exposition dump, like a
Yeah,
big exposition dump about the politics of religious cults, the next step of human evolution. This would be the clunkiest bit of the entire movie.
absolutely,
It
100%.
it feels like it should be important, but given how the movie is paced and everything else, we could do without the exposition dump. It could have been a couple sentences and moved on.
Right, right. And again, hilariously, all of that stuff is completely relevant for the chunk of the story that we don't get to see. So it's like it's important, just not for this version of the story. So yeah, I completely agree. You could cut all this.
How powerful are espers?
Yes.
Yes, that
They are yes. Um, as I understand it, there are different levels of Esper, but certainly the levels that we're talking about with the baby room and with they basically just invent powers functionally.
to take a step back, I'm gonna point out that Tasaki, we'll see shortly, can teleport at least himself and others later, is gonna do that. He could have easily teleported himself and the resistance fighter that came to free him at the start of the movie, thereby avoiding that resistance fighter getting shot and hurt in the first place and then killed, or even Tetsuo having crashed into him on a motorcycle.
I will say that the movie does not clarify this, but it does seem like using their powers exhausts them and possibly injures them. So there's an entire subplot. I know. Sadly, I have to keep bringing up the manga because it explains some parts of the movie. But there's an entire subplot of Tetsuo's where he desperately needs drugs because the pain is too powerful, and so the pain causes him to actually black out and lose control of his purse, and that's why he constantly needs drugs just to stay on top of things. And eventually, he finds a very specific drug that Kaneda actually has one capsule of, which is where the capsule thing actually comes from. Um, and when he gets that one super drug that was developed for espers, he's able to finally get control of his so a lot of it is whenever the plot demands that they're too exhausted to do it, they can't. So it's
Ugh.
not it's we're nowhere near well-defined magic rules that we've talked about before in other episodes. This is just whatever Ottoman needs for plot. So he is lampshade a little bit, like going, yeah, they just get tired occasionally, but really, it's like, no, I just need a plot. I just need.
All right, I just wanted to point that out because that was bothered me. It bothered me then. It bothers me now. But the
Yeah.
movie is so kinetic that I don't care that much. Using Kei as a medium to stop Tetsuo, Kyoko breaks her and Kaneda out of a military custody. The colonel stages a coup against the Neo Tokyo government and directs his military forces to destroy Tetsuo at all cost. At the capsule's former hangout, Tetsuo confronts the gang members Yagamota and Kai over Kaneda's bike and kills one of them. After he protests, Kai relays the news to Kaneda, who vows to avenge his friend, while Tasaki brings Kei away from Kaneda. Mistaken for Akira by the cultists, Tetsuo rampages through Neo Tokyo, arriving at Akira's cryogenic storage under the stadium. Key, powered by the Espers, fights Tetsuo, but he defeats her and exhumes Akira, only to find that Akira is a bunch of seal jars for scientific research.
This is something that took me a long time to finally sort out. Kay is the woman that Kaneda wants to have sex with. Kai is his friend with the tie, who maybe he also wants to
Yes.
have sex with. They are very similar names, even in the reading them, it's like they're very hard to keep apart. It's like, oh, why did you choose such similar names? But yes,
There's
Kai
one
is
letter difference.
his yuppie friend.
Which, um, kudos for them though. Like, giving your life for that bike, I wish I had friends that loyal.
Yeah, I agree.
And even all right, for the bar itself, when Tetsuo shows up in the bartender, who is the old one of the older guys there that's originally giving them stick at the start of the movie, is actually somewhat concerned about Tetsuo as a person. Like, "Hey, weren't you hurt? Are you okay?"
Yep.
And Tetsuo kills that guy, and then,
Yep.
like, demolishes the entire hangout.
Mhm. But you do see, the remnants of that drug plot I was talking about because Ted's like, "Hey, do you have drugs?" And the guy is concerned about him, but also is willing to and if you're just watching the movie, like, when I watched it the first time, I was like, "Why is this guy suddenly a drug dealer?" Turns out that's an entire subplot that got cut this until that scene, so
Yeah. I think I'd figured out the first time just from, like, the caps on the back of Canada, and that bar was not like, a bar.
no,
That's
totally.
that's like a fencer's den. You want it,
Even
we got it.
before I read the manga, I was like, "Okay, this it didn't come nearly as nowhere when the first time I watched it, but if you're only kind of half struggling to follow along, it does seem like it comes out of nowhere." But you're right. No, uh, the fact that the guy is letting kids sit there and drink anyway, at least to American audiences, feels like, okay, it's already a pretty sketchy par. So it ultimately lands well.
We're not even discussing the sexual assault that we see at the very start of the movie in the
Mhm.
bar. Like,
Oh,
there
yeah, that's right.
ugh. Something that I haven't mentioned throughout the entire course of this, the music is phenomenal. I think much
Mhm.
like the original Blade Runner, the music is essential in keeping you in the movie because there are
Yep.
parts that you'd wanna, like, zone out or definitely move away from, but the music drags you in and keeps you as part of it. Once again, underscoring the importance of that music that I don't think Ghost in the Shell or Blade Runner 2049 had.
Right, and the one thing I actually love about Akira is that its music is not in any way, shape, or form futuristic. It's just drums and occasional dun dun. It's an extreme. I won't say simple score because there's a lot of complexity happening, but it's just a lot of percussion, and it's done so well and so timed so perfectly that you're right. It's I can't imagine Akira without hearing that drum beats or the drum beat during the bike scenes or the da, 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 da. I mean, those are such iconic moments of the movie. I completely agree.
Like, this movie is so iconic. I posted on social media a distant shot of the biker gang from, like, at the very start of the movie, that first 3 minutes of them, so you can't see them, just, like, the scene itself, and people knew what the movie was.
Yep.
And they were, like, throwing quotes at me about the movies, like, "I could hear him," and all that throughout it, to show you how impressive and this movie has gone out to influence so many people, and is a part of their repertoire of movies and just general common knowledge.
Um, I do want to talk a little bit about the Colonel because we haven't talked much about him because he's a fascinatingly complicated character.
Mhm.
Because I mean, yes, he does declare military law, and yes, he does have the illegal government. I mean, that he's not a great person, but he's doing it
He
all.
offers to arrest them at first.
He does straight up shoot a dude before he offers to arrest him later.
You have to establish that you're serious.
Right. Um, but more to the point, he's doing it because he feels like he knew what happened the first time. He knew what's gonna happen if Akira gets loose or someone like Akira gets loose. He sees Tetsuo as just the next Akira and like, "Oh, I need to kill this kid." And he does seem to care about the 3 other kids under his command, as it were. He wants to make sure that this doesn't happen again. It's just the lengths he's willing to go to prevent that are extreme. So he's and it's interesting because like this is the kind of thing where normally we as viewers would want to be sympathetic to the rebellion, and certainly when martial law is declared, we want to be sympathetic to overthrowing a martial law situation. But we do also see, but he does have a point. Shit has really spiraled out of control, and the people that are stopping him are just doing things like they want earmarks for their own pet projects and whatnot. So they're not going to stop this horrible thing from happening. So it's like it's a really good way to present sympathy for a character who ultimately has.
True. And it's also interesting, though, something that we haven't touched on as much is that the Colonel and his lead scientists have been having a debate throughout the course of the movie whenever we really get a
Mhm.
glimpse of them together. And the scientist boils it down to like, you don't care about people, you're just trying to protect the city, versus the colonel that's saying that you just want to discover the power.
Yep.
So it's an interesting that you get to see the military complex versus the scientific complex throughout their discussions, which leads to the situation the colonel is in, because the scientist will find out, like the next beat, has known all this time about Tetsuo and just has not been sharing that information. Ugh.
It's very good.
Anything else on that incredible piece of stuff before we move on?
Oh, yeah, going.
I'm going to point out one thing before we move on. If you played the game Cyberpunk 2077, the way that Kaneda gets rid of his friend's bike is very reminiscent of a way a nomad gets rid of a vehicle in that video game. Kaneda fights Tetsuo with a laser rifle. The colonel fires an orbital weapon
Yep.
at him while the latter destroys his arm. Neither can stop Tetsuo. The colonel and Kyrie approach the stadium where Tetsuo, now with a robotic arm, is in great pain and losing control over his powers. Kiro tries restraining Tetsuo while the colonel unsuccessfully offers to heal his injuries and help control his abilities. Kaneda again fights Tetsuo, who is weakened from his missing arm, mutates into a gigantic mass of flesh. I feel very Shoggoth vibes coming off,
Yes.
engulfing Kaneda and killing Kaori. The Espers revive Akira to stop the growing mass. Reunited with his friends, Akira creates a singularity, drawing Tetsuo and Kaneda into another dimension. The Espers teleport the colonel to a safe distance as the singularity destroys Neo Tokyo in a mirror of Tokyo's previous destruction, and they agree to rescue Kaneda, knowing they will not return to this dimension as a result.
Yes.
Eddie, I believe everyone, in fact, does have the force in this movie, and encountering them helps amplify that force, because Kaneda's power is luck. He either has like black cat or long shot type of luck where it's inherently good and then it can easily flip to bad. Is the only way our otherwise normal protagonist is doing everything he's doing.
No, I agree, especially considering Kaneda disappears from the movie for a bit, comes back with a laser rifle, uses the laser rifle in the fights Tetsuo, disappears again for making we think he's dead, then comes back with another laser rifle again to shoot Tetsuo. And it's just like,
And
buddy, where are you getting these laser rifles from?
well, we see him pick up the laser rifle. That's the thing. But the fact that when he fires a normal military laser rifle that we've seen Tetsuo go, that's nothing to me, military,
Right,
hurts Tetsuo.
right,
So he's getting lucky shots in
right,
constantly. So therefore, he also must be a low powered Esper, but his only power is luck. And we get spikes of great shot. Oh shit, my battery's dead at the most important time. I can charge it up, another great shot. Things like that.
right, right. Um, so there's a certain amount of we need to wrap this movie up happening here, which I recognize. Um, but one of the benefits of this is that this movie does then boil down to Kana versus Tetsuo. Um, basically, ultimately, at the end of the day, the destruction of Neo Tokyo happens because one kid got mad at another kid's, and I'm being flip here. I'm being flip here, but also that's really the heart of this movie, right? Like the mundane concerns of two teenage boys are irreducible from planet devastating consequences. That's cyberpunk, right? You know, the epic and the street working hand in hand is very cyberpunk aesthetic. And so having Kaneda and Tetsuo having this massive mind-bending fight over the fact that Tetsuo dissed Kaneda is very resonant.
It is ridiculous, I think is a better phrase for it. I know you say that is
I love it.
cyberpunk, but the level of it that has been escalated here is utterly ridiculous. And having said that,
Cyberpunk is
much
ridiculous,
like
man.
you, I love it. If I didn't love it, I wouldn't
Mm.
want to write the genre. I
I
wouldn't
know,
be gushing over this 30 plus year old movie that was
but
way
I
ahead of
mean,
its
that's
time.
I feel like Cyberpunk is ridiculous. Blade Runner is ridiculous. I mean, you know, Ghost in the Shell is ridiculous. All of it is ridiculous on some level. This is just the first one we've seen in this series that recognizes that the heart also matters, right? The ridiculousness was very different in the Blade Runner movies and in Ghost in the Shell. This is a different level of ridiculousness, but it's you're right. It's irreducible. I love it. I think it's fantastic.
Okay, Mr. Webb. Out of these different worlds you've just mentioned, which one specifically would you want to live in if you had to be in one of them?
Oh dear God.
Original Blade
If I
Runner,
had
Ghost in the Shell, 2049, or Akira?
2049 is probably the one that's the most stable. But I mean, like, I would not want to. I love Akira. I would not want to live in Tokyo 2019 because I don't know if you noticed it, but they explode every 30 years.
True. I was just curious because it's hard choices. This one is infinitely more engaging than the other three.
I one of the things that this shares with the original Blade Runner that I feel like we both noted didn't quite happen in the other two movies is that it feels lived in.
Yeah.
Um, Much like that initial iconic street scene with Neo Tokyo feels like a real place. And like just even as much we glossed over this, but the scene with the politicians in the general, one of these side conversations is a lot of politicians going, why can't we just put this in the past? You know, we're building this Olympic stadium so we can show that Tokyo's moved on beyond its devastation, and that's important to us. And watching that recently really resonated with a lot of the COVID's over, we need to rebuild our life
Mhm.
talk that I'm hearing now. And let's ignore these big problems because we want to just feel like we moved on and we need to bring normalcy back. So those are very real concerns that, like, I don't agree with this politician at all, but I feel like those are things that politicians would say in this moment. So that, and having a general who is not a cackling madman, but is just mired by bureaucracy and finally says, "Fuck it, I'm going to start murdering people just to save everyone's life." Again, feels like a real moment. So yeah, having a kid with ultimate power getting mad at his buddy feels very real.
It'll be how I think I've said a couple times on the podcast is that in Planescape Torment, the most evil route you can take in the game is to be the pragmatic one. And the
Mhm.
Colonel here is the pragmatic one in this universe.
Yep.
And it comes across as evil, but it would have the most life. It would save more people than it would actually kill, which is
Yeah.
a hard line to walk to make you kind of hate him from what he's doing, but at the same time understand why he's doing it. Anything else before we go into the singularity?
No, because unfortunately, I gotta get going real fast so we wrap this up.
All right. In the singularity, Kaneda experiences Tetsuo and the other Esper's childhoods, including his friends Tetsuo and the Esper's psychic training before Tokyo's destruction. The Espers return Kaneda to Neo Tokyo, informing him that Akira will take Tetsuo to safety, and Ki is developing psychic powers. Witnessing the birth of the universe, but is killed in his lab when it's destroyed. After consuming most of Neo Tokyo, the singularity disappears and water floods the crater left in place, which destroys my moon theory. Mourning Tetsuo's loss, Kaneda discovers that Ki and K have survived and they ride off into the ruins while the colonel watches the sunrise. At an unspecified plane of reality, Tetsuo introduces himself and triggers the creation of a universe, finally transcending the limits of human existence.
Yeah, and we actually covered a lot of this already. I had forgotten about the water filling into the crater, but again, the water physics for hand drawn animation, amazing. A small, beautiful moment inside of this chaos. Um, and I mean, ultimately, it ends on obviously a very surreal, epic universe kind of thing, but all the other bits are just very small human moments. Right? Um, like Kaneda's sad that his friend is gone, and oh hey, but two other friends I have are alive, so let's figure things out. The colonel is just like, okay, well, that happened, and trying to clearly figure out what to do next. And so just staring off into space. Um, it's the what do you do when your whole world has been destroyed, right? And there's different ways of coping with all of that. But even in the destruction, there is still rebirth. So there's obviously the higher thing of everything that it went through led to the creation of something else. So from devastation comes life, which is again very Japanese sentiment in terms of how they're thinking. So it's a muddy ending, but I can't think of I can't think of a different one, even though literally I know there's another one, but for how this movie progresses, it needs to be something just it's just stuff happens, you know?
Yeah, I can see that. Now I'm really thinking though about the correlation between the Colonel and the father from Evangelion and the choices
Yeah,
and decisions. But
I
I
can
think
totally see
that would
that.
be like a longer conversation that we'd have to watch the two closer together to make a proper comparison.
Certainly, yeah, it's like when you're an adult in charge of child soldiers, which for what you believe to be to protect the city or your world, and what kind of decisions you make as a result of that. Yeah, there's a lot to dig in there, possibly.
And much how you've said though, that there's no other way this movie could have ended. Especially there's no other way this movie could have ended if you talked to Alejandro, who told you how his Dune would end, and you went, "Huh? Thank you for a quick, easy way to resolve my issue I was having." That I think is brilliant.
Yeah, certainly you can see we've been talking I've been talking about dream logic through a lot of these movies, and this is the obviously the most dream logic-y of it. So yeah, you can see that influence of like, I don't know, he creates a universe, I guess. Sure. All right.
So Eddie, before I try to convince you that we're going to have to do an Alejandro retrospective series, what can people expect next time, and where can these same people reach out to you to tell you that Chris is wrong and this has no relation whatsoever to Dune?
Well, next time we're gonna watch Max Headroom, the CBS show, because there have been 3 Max Headroom shows, and we'll talk about that. But this is the original fiction-based Max Headroom show. We're gonna watch episode 101 Blipverts, episode 103 Body Banks, and episode 105, I already lost it, 202 Deities. And you can find those. Good luck finding those, but there are some DVDs around, and I think they're up on Archive. But if you want to talk to me or to explain to me why I'm right and Chris is wrong, you can find me at pugsteady.com. That's my website. That is also where you can find me on Blue Sky, or you can find me on.
And if you're looking to contact me to let me know why I'm always right, you can do that in Dark Hue Discord or anywhere on social media that's Darker Hue. If you want to buy my stuff, just join my Patreon. It's Harlan Belding. And with
Okay.
that, I have one final word to say to you. Tetsuo!